The Dragons of Stormwreck Isle is not a perfect adventure, but it's a really good adventure, and it's a short, good starter adventure that I've recommended multiple times on this channel. So I'm going to use that to break down 10 examples of good adventure design that you can implement when you prepare your adventures for your Dungeons & Dragons games. I'm Brad Wolf, and welcome to Diredan, and thanks to everybody who came out to the Dungeon Masters workshop at Cape Fear Games in Wilmington. We had a great time. There's about a dozen of us talking about how to be a better DM. It's fantastic. Obviously, there's going to be spoilers for Stormwreck Isle, so be aware of that before you keep going. But even if you never run Stormwreck Isle, these tips will still be valuable to you and help you run your future sessions. But let's dive into Stormwreck Isle and look at 10 ways you can improve your adventure prep and your adventure design. Tip number 1, start strong. Make your opening scene something that's cinematic or interesting or engaging. Invite the players to dive into the adventure right away. You step from the boat onto the shore and you see above you the temple on the rocky hill looking down upon the beach as you trudge up the sand. And just then, you hear groaning and grumbling as something's climbing out of the water behind you. Zombies. Now, what this strong start does well is it gives players choices. They can fight right out of the gate, which a lot of players are itching to do when they sit down at the table. They want to roll dice. However, if your players aren't the type that want to dive right into combat, they can get away from this fight because zombies are slow and players can just leave those zombies behind on the beach. So what works really well for this strong start is it gets right into the action, but it also gives the players choices to either fight or flee from the situation. Establishing the tone at the beginning of the adventure can be extremely helpful because it not only lets your players know that this is the feel for the campaign, it also helps you as the DM know what to include and what to throw out. So if you're tempted to put too much into your adventure, you can ask yourself, which of these things really enforces and enhances the tone that I've established for this game? Stormwreck Isle establishes its tone really well. It's a confined space. It's on an island, and that island is heavily influenced by its history with dragons. And its primary feature is a monastery where the folks who live there worship Bahamut, the dragon god. But that peace is interrupted by a curse that is on the island, creating this conflicting tone between the peaceful residents and this evil curse that is now influencing the island itself. And the adventure comes with pre-made characters whose backstories are connected to this peaceful monastery and or to the curse that's upon the island. So even if you don't use the pre-made characters, you can use the backstories that come with the pre-made characters to suggest ideas for your player characters' backstories, so that they can engage with this island before they even make up their character. They can have these ideas set forth during your session 0, where you build characters within the tone and the framework that the adventure is aiming for. So the lesson here is to set a tone for the adventure and find ways to communicate that to your players, and even possibly incorporate that into the player characters' backstories so that the characters, the players, and you as a DM are all on the same page when it comes to the tone and mood of the adventure. So the conflict between the peaceful residents of the island and the curse that is upon the island creates a sense of urgency. And that's the next tip: create urgency. Find a way to incentivize the players and get them moving into the adventure as soon as possible. So the examples from Stormwreck Isle include an NPC that lives at the monastery and trades with a group of myconids, mushroom folk, that live in the caves on the island. And this NPC is eager to find out why the mushroom folk have stopped trading with him, why they've cut off communication. So he is eager to get to the bottom of the problem and find out how to reestablish his trade and his business. The other urgent need on this island is a shipwreck, and the residents of the island are concerned about why this ship wrecked on its shore and why that shipwreck is spilling zombies out upon the beach. which of course the players have already experienced because of the strong start. So it's easy for the players to get invested in that plot hook because they've already had to fight some zombies. Tip number 4 is foreshadowing. It's really helpful to hint at the things that are coming up in the adventure. This not only reinforces the tone, but the foreshadowing allows your players to get clues as to what's coming up. And that helps players feel really smart when they have that aha moment. I thought it could be this. So some good examples that Stormwreck provides of foreshadowing includes a group of friendly kobolds who live in the monastery. And one of those kobolds has family members who are working for the main villain. So by introducing the character Mila at the beginning of the adventure, you foreshadow her siblings, her brother and sister, who are working for the dragon at the end of the adventure. Another little bit of foreshadowing is one of the NPCs will complain about the hungry, icky, blood-sucking bat things that live in the caves nearby. And that foreshadows the sturges that can attack the player characters when they start to explore the caves. But potentially one of the biggest surprises in this adventure is that the main NPC and leader of the monastery, Elder Runara, is secretly a bronze dragon. So while the player characters can interact with Runara multiple times, and each time she can drop hints and lore about dragons and the draconic ancestry of the island itself, she herself is a bronze dragon. And not only has she set the characters on this path, she will reward them for removing the curse on her island. The next tip is callbacks and consequences. These are great because they help connect the dots and help players feel like the choices they've made have value or impact on the world around them. Remember our strong start with the zombies? This is an example of how consequences can come back to impact the players. If the player characters do not fight those zombies at the beginning of the adventure, those zombies will return. And more zombies will keep coming if the players don't solve the problem of the cursed shipwreck. And that's how consequences can reinforce that sense of urgency that we talked about earlier. And callbacks are nice little reminders to help players feel like their choices have value. And that's easy to do in Stormwreck Isle because each time the player characters return to the monastery, they can interact with the NPCs, and those NPCs can remind them how much they value the players for solving the problems on the island. You'll often get the advice that it's better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. But that doesn't mean you have to do a whole lot of over-prep. All that means is to give yourself options. Giving yourself options includes just a handful of extra encounters that you can throw in whenever you need to. And Stormwreck Isle does a good job of giving you 3 extra encounters that you can splash in whenever you need. Now remember those friendly kobolds that live in the monastery? Well, not all kobolds are like them. There's others that work for the dragon Sparkrender, and they are sinister and snarling and looking to give your player characters some trouble. There's also an owlbear that lives on the island, and that could be extremely deadly for low-level players. However, that owlbear has a little story behind it, and that's something your players can figure out if they're clever. And remember the curse that's upon the island? That's due to the death of a red dragon, and its corpse is underneath the island, radiating draconic energy that's creating these smoldering, smoking draconic creatures called fume drakes. And that's another thing the players might run into if you need an extra encounter during this adventure. So these 3 extra encounters aren't really a lot of over preparation. It's just something you can throw in as needed whenever you need to spice up a scene or get the players motivated and get them back involved in doing something that drives them towards the quest. In the same way as a DM, you want to give yourself options, you also want to give the players choices. And Stormwreck Isle does a pretty good job of that too, because it gives you 2 different adventure locations, the Seagrow Caves and the Cursed Shipwreck. Both of these locations are written for first-level characters. However, the adventure also shows you how to run each one for second-level characters. That way, no matter which one the players choose to do first, you can run that at first level and then run the other one at second level. Another simple way to give players choices is presenting them with 2 different paths to get to a location. And this adventure does that as well when it comes to the Seagrow Caves. There's 2 different ways the players can choose. They can take a boat and go around the edge of the island, or they can travel across the island on land. And this is a place where the adventure kind of falls short because while it gives players these options to go 2 different ways to get to the caves, there's no real consequence for the choice you make. If I was running this, I would add an encounter along the shore, maybe something with a seafaring creature, and I would take one of those extra encounters I talked about earlier and put that on the land route. So maybe if they travel by land, they run into some renegade kobolds or maybe the owlbear. So you don't have to be dramatically over-prepared. It's just a few extra encounters, a couple extra combat encounters, a couple extra roleplay encounters that you can plug and play as needed. So you can use a combat encounter to pick up the pace when needed, or a roleplay encounter to slow down the pace when needed. Either way, these extra encounters help your players feel like there's consequences for their actions, and it also can help your world feel more realistic and more lived in. So speaking of making your world feel lived in, adding lore accomplishes just that. But don't feel pressured to know a whole lot of history of the Forgotten Realms or to write a bunch of your own history for your homebrew setting. Most of the time, players do not appreciate a big expedition dump as much as you hope they will. Instead, inject lore in small ways as explanations for why things are the way they are. In this example, we're looking at the Compass Rose, a cursed shipwreck, and the sailors from this vessel are now zombies. And the curse that's upon them is related to the demon prince Orcus. And you don't need to explain much more than that. It's just offering up an explanation for why the zombies are here. There's no need for an explanation of who Orcus is and what the demon prince is and all the other demon princes that live in this world. It's just the knowledge that there's something bigger and greater out there that the players might discover more later. So it's really best to use lore and history for simple explanations and foreshadowing for future events. The next tip is dynamic dungeons. Now, throughout the history of D&D, a dungeon is nothing but a group of rooms. No matter if it's a castle, catacombs, or caverns, a manor, tower, or fortress, it's just a group of numbered rooms, and those numbers correspond to a key that let you know what is in those rooms. And that's nothing more than a convenient way for the adventure designer to convey to the reader, you the dungeon master, what is in the dungeon. But just because it says the monsters are in room 13 doesn't mean they have to stay there. They don't have to wait to be encountered by the players. They can always move from that room, and they can encounter the player characters. They do more than just eat and sleep. So think of how these creatures entertain themselves, how they socialize, and how they procure needed resources. So as we continue to use Stormwreck Isle as our example, the Seagrove Caves are a relatively small set of caverns. However, those caverns include a giant octopus that guards the entrance, aggressive violet fungi that can attack the player characters, intelligent fungal creatures called myconids, the dilemma that some of the myconids are infected by the curse, an exploration encounter that reveals a giant crystal is at the heart of that curse, and that crystal is actually an egg that when it's broken, hatches aggressive fume drakes and those blood-sucking sturges that we foreshadowed earlier. And those sturges are not aggressive to the myconids that live in the caverns because sturges drink blood and mushroom people don't have blood. The sturges will, however, be aggressive towards the player characters. So even though these caverns aren't very large at all, it's a very dynamic environment and provides a really good example of how to include problem-solving, role-playing, and exploration, and not just combat encounters in your dungeon. So now that we've talked about dynamic dungeons and why the monsters do the things they do, and the history and lore of why the monsters are there in the first place, and you have this mindset of your monster, now start to think about the difficulty of combat and how you can use the knowledge of those creatures to run the combats in a realistic way. But at the same time, you can dial the difficulty using explanations for the monster's behavior. So Stormwreck Isle ends with a blue dragon wormling and the kobolds who are working for him. So this wormling is young and immature, but he's still smarter than your average kobold. So all of those things are something to factor in when you're running these final encounters. So if the players have been getting their butts kicked and you're afraid to make the final encounter too difficult, you can use the fact that the wormling is young and the kobolds aren't that smart, make these creatures not that efficient and not that tactical, in combat. So you can have them attack independently instead of all at once in an organized fashion. You can also have them scatter easily if they get scared. On the other hand, if you want to dial up the difficulty, use the explanation that these creatures stay grouped together in order to protect themselves and therefore provide a more difficult combat because they're all attacking in unison and protecting each other. Ultimately, you want your game sessions to be as engaging and as fun as possible. So use these tips as you see fit to enhance your game sessions and make your games as fun and creative as you want them to be. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time in the Dire Den.